The rhythmic beep 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 of the cardiac monitor was usually a comforting pulse in the hushed intensity of the recovery room, a steady drumbeat of life. Tonight, to Sarah Jenkins, it sounded like a frantic, slowing heart. Mr. Henderson, 72, post-op from a routine gallbladder removal, lay pale and still beneath the crisp white sheet. Dr. Marcus Thorne, the charismatic, lauded surgeon, had breezed out an hour ago, barely glancing at his patient, already mentally on his way to a late dinner. But Sarah, 26 and only 2 years out of nursing school, felt a cold dread curling in her stomach. His blood pressure was dropping slowly, inexorably, from a stable 120/70 to 98/55. His heart rate, conversely, was climbing, a compensatory effort, now tapping at 105 beats per minute. His skin, cool and clammy to her touch, was losing its healthy pink, morphing into a translucent, almost waxy pallor. These weren't just numbers on a screen, they were a story, and the story they told was one of quiet, internal hemorrhaging. Sarah double-checked the IV drip, adjusted the oxygen, and then, with a professional calm that belied the frantic alarm bells ringing in her head, she picked up the phone. "This is Sarah Jenkins, RN, in recovery. I need to speak with Dr. Thorne regarding Mr. Henderson." The secretary patched her through. A moment later, a groggy, annoyed voice answered. "Thorne? Dr. Thorne, this is Sarah Jenkins. I'm concerned about Mr. Henderson. His blood pressure is trending down, heart rate up, and he's very pale. I suspect internal bleeding." She recited the vitals, clear and concise, every word a plea for attention. There was a dismissive sigh on the other end. "Jenkins, it's 9 p.m. He just had surgery. He's 72. He's probably just a little hypotensive from the anesthesia and dehydration. Give him a bolus of saline and let him rest. Don't page me again unless he's actively coding. I've had a long day." The line went dead before she could offer another detail, another vital, another plea. Sarah stared at the phone, a knot tightening in her chest. Actively coding. By then it would be too late. Dr. Thorne, with his impeccable reputation and charming smile, had a habit of treating nurses like glorified order takers, useful for fetching charts, and little else. He never listened, not really. But Mr. Henderson wasn't a chart. He was a human being, and he was fading. She administered the saline bolus, but her hands trembled slightly. She knew in her gut that fluids wouldn't fix a bleeder. She pulled up Mr. Henderson's chart, meticulously documenting Dr. Thorne's dismissive response and her subsequent actions. Every nurse knew the mantra. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. But more than that, she knew this documentation might one day be Mr. BMICI2, Henderson's only advocate. 10 minutes later, Mr. Henderson's blood pressure had barely budged. His heart rate, however, had crept up to 110. He stirred, a weak groan escaping his lips. "Nurse, I feel dizzy." His voice was reedy, barely a whisper. "Mr. Henderson, I'm right here," Sarah said, taking his clammy hand. It was cold, too cold. She picked up the phone again, this time calling the on-call surgical resident, Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee was fresh out of med school, perpetually tired, and famously terrified of incurring Dr. Thorne's wrath. "Dr. Lee, it's Sarah Jenkins. Mr. Henderson's condition is worsening. His BP is 90/48, HR 115. I still suspect internal bleeding. He's complaining of dizziness and increasing abdominal tenderness. I think we need a stat CT scan, or at least a focused abdominal sonography for trauma." There was a long pause. "Look, Sarah, I understand your concern, but Dr. Thorne just told you to give him fluids. He's the attending. I can't just override him. You know how he is about unnecessary interventions." Dr. Lee's voice was laced with an almost pathetic fear. He knew, Sarah realized. He just wasn't brave enough. Unnecessary? Dr. Lee, this man is deteriorating. If we wait, it will be too late. Sarah's voice rose, a rare tremor of desperation. I'll call Dr. Thorne again myself," Dr. Lee stammered, clearly hoping to avoid direct conflict. "Give me 5 minutes. 5 minutes. 5 minutes that stretched into an eternity." Mr. Henderson began to drift, his eyes fluttering. His oxygen saturation, previously stable at 97%, dipped to 92%. Sarah adjusted his mask, pumped up the oxygen, but his breathing became shallow, ragged. She knew she didn't have 5 minutes. She bypassed Dr. Lee, bypassing the chain of command, doing what she had to do. She called the stat lab, ordering a full CBC, and then she called the charge nurse, Martha, a veteran of 20 years who knew the hospital's politics inside and out, but also understood patient advocacy. Martha, I have a code red situation brewing with Mr. Henderson. Dr. Thorne dismissed my concerns. Dr. Lee is dragging his feet, and this man is bleeding out. I need an emergency surgical consult, and I need it now. Martha, bless her cynical heart, heard the uncharacteristic panic in Sarah's voice. I'm on my way, and I'm calling Dr. Chen, the surgical fellow. He doesn't owe Thorne anything. By the time Martha arrived, pushing a crash cart with practiced efficiency, Mr. Henderson's blood pressure was barely registering. His pulse was thready, almost imperceptible. Dr. Chen, a stern, no-nonsense surgeon, jogged in moments later, his face grim as he glanced at the monitor. What happened here? He demanded, already palpating Mr. Henderson's rigid abdomen. Dr. Thorne dismissed concerns over the phone, Sarah explained, her voice tight with suppressed rage. I've documented everything. She handed him the chart, her finger pointing to the rapidly declining vitals and Dr. Thorne's call log. Dr. Chen's eyes narrowed. Get him to the OR. Stat. Prep for exploratory laparotomy. I'll scrub in. He barked orders to Martha, who sprang into action. They rushed Mr. Henderson down the hall, the gurney bumping ominously. Sarah stayed at his side, holding his hand, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure he could hear. Just as they reached the operating room doors, the beep-beep-beep flatlined into a long, mournful wail. Code Blue! Martha yelled, pushing the crash cart closer. Sarah immediately started chest compressions, her hands pressing down rhythmically, brutally, on Mr. Henderson's sternum. 1, 2, 3. She pumped, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The image of his pale, fading face burned into her mind. Dr. Chen took over the airway, inserting an intubation tube with practiced ease. But the fight was already lost. Mr. Henderson's body, already drained of so much life, offered little resistance. They worked on him for 20 agonizing minutes, the OR a blur of controlled chaos. But there was no rhythm, no pulse, no flicker of life in his eyes. Finally, Dr. Chen called it. Time of death, 9:47 p.m. Sarah stepped back, her chest heaving, her hands smeared with Mr. Henderson's blood. It was warm, sticky, and final. Dr. Chen looked at her, his expression grim. You did everything you could, Nurse Jenkins. It was too late. He had a massive hemorrhage from a nicked artery. It would have been obvious if someone had looked sooner. The unspoken accusation hung heavy in the air. Someone, Dr. Marcus Thorne. Sarah felt a surge of raw, unadulterated fury. Not just for Mr. Henderson, not just for herself, but for every patient who had ever been dismissed, ignored, or harmed by the arrogance of a doctor who thought he was above reproach. She looked down at her blood-stained hands, then at the meticulously documented chart. The truth was there, undeniable, incriminating. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she couldn't let this go. Mr. Henderson deserved more. Every patient deserved more. She would not be silent. The hospital halls the next morning felt colder, the lights harsher, the whispers more conspiratorial. Sarah had spent a sleepless night replaying every second of Mr. Henderson's decline, every dismissive word from Dr. Thorne. The grief was a dull ache, but the anger was a sharp, focused point. She arrived early, before her shift, to do what she knew was right. She walked into Martha's office, the incident report clutched in her hand. Martha looked up, her expression tired. Sarah, rough night, I heard. I've filed a formal incident report, Sarah stated, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Against Dr. Thorne. Negligence, dismissal of patient concerns, failure to respond appropriately to a deteriorating patient. I've attached my notes. She laid the thick stack of papers on Martha's desk, her meticulous handwriting a testament to her care and attention. Every blood pressure reading, every heart rate spike, every call, every dismissal was there, time-stamped, undeniable. Martha picked up the report, scanning it, her lips thinned. This is comprehensive, Sarah, and very damning. You know what you're doing, don't you? Against Thorne? I'm doing what's right, Sarah said, meeting Martha's gaze. Mr. Henderson died because of his negligence, and he tried to silence me. I can't be silent. Martha sighed, a long, weary sound. All right. I'll make sure it gets to the right people. But prepare yourself, kid. This won't be easy. Sarah, still naive enough to believe in the system's integrity, thought that once the facts were laid bare, justice would naturally follow. She was wrong. 2 days later, the summons came. A terse email from Human Resources. Please report to Miss Evans's office, Director of Nursing, at 10:00 a.m. today. HR will also be present. Miss Evans was a woman carved from granite. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to strain her features. Her suit was impeccably tailored, and her eyes, behind rimless glasses, were devoid of warmth. She sat behind a large, polished desk, flanked by a quiet HR representative, Mr. Davies, who looked perpetually uncomfortable. Nurse Jenkins, thank you for coming, Miss Evans began, her voice crisp, devoid of any discernible emotion. She did not offer Sarah a seat. We need to discuss the incident report you filed regarding Dr. Thorne and Mr. Henderson. Sarah's spine stiffened. Yes. As my report details, Dr. Thorne was negligent in his care, leading to Mr. Henderson's death. I followed all protocols, attempted to escalate, and was dismissed. Miss Evans's lips barely twitched. I see. And what is your history with Dr. Thorne, Nurse Jenkins? Any personal animosity? Any prior disagreements? Sarah blinked, caught off guard. None. I respect his surgical skill, but I do not respect his disregard for patient safety or his dismissive attitude towards nursing staff. A relatively new nurse making serious accusations against one of our most senior, most valued surgeons, Miss Evans mused, her gaze unwavering. Dr. Thorne brings in a significant amount of revenue for this hospital, Nurse Jenkins. He is a pillar of our surgical department. Are you certain your interpretation of the events is entirely objective? The insinuation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Sarah felt a cold anger begin to simmer. My interpretation is based on vital signs, documented communications, and established nursing protocols. Mr. Henderson bled to death, Miss Evans. That's not an interpretation, it's a fact. And you believe you handled the situation perfectly? Miss Evans pressed, leaning forward slightly. Perhaps your assessment of the patient's condition was overly alarmist? Or your communication style too aggressive, causing Dr. Thorne to react defensively? Sarah stared at her, dumbfounded. Was this really happening? Was she being blamed for Mr. Henderson's death? I was advocating for my patient, as I am professionally obligated to do. I followed my training. I followed the hospital's own guidelines for escalation. Suddenly, the door opened, and in walked Dr. Thorne. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his smile radiating a practiced charm. He looked utterly relaxed, as if he were walking into a social gathering, not a serious disciplinary meeting. Ah, Sarah. Miss Evans. Mr. Davies? Dr. Thorne said smoothly, nodding to each in turn, a picture of genial professionalism. He took a seat casually, as if by right, despite not having been present at the start of the meeting. Sarah felt her blood run cold. This wasn't just a meeting, it was an ambush. Dr. Thorne, we were just discussing Nurse Jenkins' report, Miss Evans said, her tone softening immediately. Dr. Thorne nodded gravely. Yes, a most unfortunate incident. My deepest sympathies to Mr. Henderson's family, of course. He cast a sympathetic glance at Sarah, a performance she found utterly repulsive. I understand Sarah's distress. She's a young nurse, very passionate. Sometimes that passion can lead to overreactions. Sarah felt her jaw clench. Dr. Thorne, you explicitly dismissed my concerns and told me not to page you again unless Mr. Henderson was actively coding. He chuckled, a light, disarming sound. Now, Sarah, that's not entirely accurate, is it? I told you to administer fluids, which you did, and I advised you to monitor. I recall stating that his vitals, while slightly off, were within the acceptable post-operative range for a man of his age and underlying conditions. He paused, turning to Miss Evans. I also recall telling Nurse Jenkins specifically to call the resident on call if she had further concerns, which she eventually did, but perhaps not as promptly as she could have. My understanding is that there was a delay in getting the resident to assess the patient, which I'm sure was frustrating for everyone. It was a masterclass in deflection and subtle accusation. He twisted her words, misrepresented his own, and subtly shifted blame to her and Dr. Lee. Sarah could feel her face flush with indignant heat. Dr. Thorne, my notes clearly indicate your direct instructions and my immediate concerns about the patient's deteriorating condition, Sarah countered, trying to keep her voice level. His blood pressure was dropping, heart rate rising, he was pale and clammy. These are not within acceptable range. Dr. Thorne adopted a paternalistic tone. Sarah, with all due respect, Sometimes newer nurses can misinterpret subtle signs or get caught up in the urgency of the moment. We all learn, don't we? Perhaps you felt overwhelmed. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I assure you, Mr. Henderson's initial presentation, while concerning, did not immediately indicate the severity of the internal hemorrhage that tragically manifested later. That was an unforeseen complication. Of unforeseen? Sarah wanted to scream. You were told! I told you! But Miss Evans cut her off. Nurse Jenkins, Dr. Thorne is one of our most experienced physicians. His judgment is rarely, if ever, called into question. Your detailed notes, while thorough, also reflect a degree of alarm that might have contributed to a disproportionate response. Perhaps, as Dr. Thorne suggests, you were a little overwhelmed. The gaslighting was intense, suffocating. They weren't hearing her. They weren't looking at the evidence. They were protecting their own and sacrificing her. The meeting ended without any resolution, or so Sarah thought. She returned to the floor, her stomach churning, the cheerful banter of her colleagues feeling like an alien sound. She tried to work, but the injustice gnawed at her. 2 days later, another email, this one even terser. Nurse Jenkins, please report to HR at 3:00 p.m. today. Miss Evans will also be present. This time, she knew. The air in the HR office was thick with unspoken finality. Miss Evans sat across from her, Mr. Davies beside her, looking more uncomfortable than usual. Dr. Thorne was conspicuously absent. Nurse Jenkins, Miss Evans began, her voice still devoid of emotion. The hospital has conducted a thorough review of the incident involving Mr. Henderson, your subsequent report, and your interactions with Dr. Thorne and other staff. Sarah braced herself. We have determined that your conduct in this matter constitutes insubordination, a failure to adhere to the established chain of command, and attempts to create a hostile work environment by making unsubstantiated accusations against a senior physician. Unsubstantiated? The word felt like a physical blow. Therefore, Miss Evans continued, her gaze fixed just above Sarah's head, your employment with St. Jude's Hospital is terminated, effective immediately. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't a shock, not really, but the bluntness of it, the cold corporate cruelty, still hit her with stunning force. Insubordination? Hostile work environment? I reported a doctor who was negligent and caused a patient's death. You're firing me for doing my job, for protecting patients. Her voice trembled, cracking with the raw emotion she could no longer suppress. Mr. Davies spoke for the first time, his voice soft, almost apologetic. Nurse Jenkins, we understand this is difficult, but your termination is based on a pattern of behavior, not just this one incident. It was a lie, a flimsy excuse, but she knew arguing was pointless. You'll receive your final paycheck and any accrued benefits, Miss Evans interjected, pushing a folded document across the table. And a reminder of the non-disclosure agreement you signed upon hiring? Any disparaging remarks about St. Jude's Hospital or its staff, or any public discussion of internal incidents, will be considered a breach of contract. It was a warning, a threat. Be quiet, or face further consequences. Sarah didn't even look at the paper. She just stood there staring at Miss Evans, a woman who had prioritized the hospital's reputation and a doctor's ego over a patient's life and a nurse's integrity. My things are in a box in the staff lounge, Mr. Davies said, gesturing towards the door. I'll escort you out. The walk through the hospital felt like a perp walk. Colleagues averted their eyes. The security guard, a burly man named Frank who always joked with her, looked away as Mr. Davies handed him her ID badge. Frank took a pair of shears and, with a wince of apology, snipped the laminated plastic in half. The sound was sharp, decisive, a severing of her professional identity. Escorted to the employee entrance, clutching a cardboard box containing her stethoscope, a half-eaten granola bar, and a framed photo of her and her nursing school classmates, Sarah stepped out into the harsh afternoon Sunday. The hospital, once a place of purpose and healing, now loomed behind her like a monolithic symbol of injustice. She was jobless, silenced, and professionally ruined. But beneath the humiliation and despair, a tiny ember of defiance still glowed. She had done the right thing, and she wasn't going to let them erase it. The weeks that followed blurred into a suffocating haze of rejection and mounting debt. Sarah, once so proud of her career, now felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of a life she no longer had. The job search was brutal. Every application she submitted felt like a leap of faith, only to be met with a polite, generic rejection email or worse, no response at all. She knew with a sinking certainty that Miss Evans wasn't just firing her. She was poisoning the well. Subtle calls, hushed whispers, troublemaker, insubordinate, emotional, not a team player. Her nursing license was still active, but no one seemed willing to risk hiring the nurse who had dared to challenge a powerful doctor. The financial strain became a relentless, physical weight. Her student loan payments, already a crushing burden, loomed larger than ever. Rent for her small apartment in the city was due. Car insurance. Utilities. The carefully constructed scaffolding of her life was crumbling. Shame, hot and prickly, replaced her initial indignation. She found herself lying to her parents, telling them she was taking a break, exploring other options. The thought of admitting she'd been fired for doing the right thing, only to be left jobless and in despair, was too much to bear. One evening, after another day of fruitless job applications, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at a stack of bills she couldn't pay. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her landlord, a polite but firm reminder about the overdue rent. A wave of nausea washed over her. She couldn't ask her parents for money. They were already struggling. Desperate, she signed up for a rideshare service. The first few shifts were pure humiliation. Picking up drunk college students, listening to their vacuous chatter, driving people to hospitals where she once worked. It was a daily reminder of how far she had fallen. She'd meticulously cleaned her car, a modest Honda Civic, trying to make it presentable, but it felt like polishing a coffin. One night, she picked up a well-dressed woman who complained about the state of healthcare, oblivious to the fact that her driver was a highly skilled, unemployed nurse. Sarah bit her tongue so hard she tasted blood. The indignity was a slow, burning fire in her gut. Her few nursing friends from street, Jude's became distant. A quick call, a hesitant apology. "Look, Sarah, I just can't get involved. Miss Evans is watching everyone right now." The fear was palpable. Sarah understood. They had their own lives, their own mortgages, their own careers to protect, but the isolation only deepened her despair. One Sunday, her father called. "Sarah, how are things really? Your mother's worried. Are you sure you're doing the right thing by not letting this go? Maybe you should have just kept your head down, found another job and moved on. You need to pay those bills, honey." His voice was gentle, laced with concern, but his words felt like a fresh betrayal. He meant well, but he didn't understand. This wasn't just about a job, it was about justice. It was about Mr. Henderson. A week later, a thick envelope arrived. Not a job offer, not a bill, but a letter from a prestigious law firm representing St. Jude's Hospital. It was a cease and desist order. Apparently, after she'd cautiously reached out to her old colleague, Martha, for advice, the hospital had been notified. The letter accused her of slander, defamation, and attempting to interfere with contractual relationships, threatening severe legal action if she continued to harass hospital employees or disparage the hospital's reputation. Sarah's hands trembled as she read it. Harass? She'd only asked Martha for support, for an ally. Now she was being threatened with a lawsuit. They weren't just taking her job, they were trying to silence her completely, to erase her. Panicked, she drove to the nearest police station. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a pallid glow on the scuffed linoleum floor. She approached the desk, the cease and desist letter clutched in her sweaty hand. "Excuse me, officer," she began, her voice a little shaky. "I need some advice. I've received this letter, and I'm worried I'm in legal trouble. I was fired from the hospital for reporting a bad doctor, and now they're threatening to sue me." The desk sergeant, a large man with a world-weary expression and a perpetually bored gaze, didn't even look up from his computer screen. "Name? Sarah Jenkins." He finally lifted his eyes, briefly scanning the letter she offered. He didn't read it thoroughly, just glanced at the letterhead. "St. Jude's Hospital, huh? Big outfit. What exactly are you doing that they're threatening to sue you?" "I just tried to talk to a former colleague, asking for advice, for support. They fired me for reporting a doctor who caused a patient's death," Sarah repeated, trying to convey the gravity of the situation. The sergeant scoffed lightly. "Look, ma'am, this sounds like a civil matter. You got fired, they're telling you to stop talking about it. Pretty standard. It's between you and them. We don't get involved in employment disputes." He pushed the letter back across the counter. "My advice? Stay away from the hospital, and don't be calling up their employees. You don't want to get yourself slapped with a restraining order or a trespassing charge. They got deep pockets, those hospital lawyers. You don't want to mess with that." He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, already turning back to his computer, his disinterest a fresh wound. The system, she realized, wasn't just indifferent. It was actively hostile. No one wanted to listen. No one wanted to help. The powerful protected the powerful. Just as she was about to leave, feeling utterly defeated, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, her patience worn thin. But something made her answer. "Hello? Is this Sarah Jenkins?" a woman's voice asked, tentative but clear. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Susan Henderson, Mr. Henderson's daughter. I hope this isn't inappropriate. I found your name on some of the early hospital paperwork, a nurse who was with my father that night. The hospital told us his passing was just a complication of his age, a terrible, unavoidable tragedy. But, I don't know, he was so healthy for 72, and he kept saying how dizzy he felt that night. It just doesn't feel right. I keep thinking there's more to it." Her voice cracked with a quiet, lingering grief. Sarah felt a jolt, a spark in the suffocating darkness. Mr. Henderson, his daughter. They were searching for answers, just like she was. A profound sense of responsibility washed over her, pushing aside the fear and despair. This wasn't just about her job, her ruined career. It was about Mr. Henderson. It was about justice for his family. "Susan," Sarah said, her voice stronger than she thought it would be. "Thank you for calling. There is more to it. Much more. I was fired for reporting what happened that night, and I can tell you with certainty that your father's death was preventable. I have all the documentation." Susan was silent for a moment, then a shaky breath. "My God, I knew it. Can we talk? Please?" "Yes," Sarah said, a fierce determination igniting in her. "We can, and we will. I'm going to fight this. And I think, with your help, we can get justice for your father." She walked out of the police station, the cease and desist letter still in her hand, but it no longer felt like a death sentence. It felt like a declaration of war. She might be at rock bottom, but she wasn't out. Not yet. She had one last roll of the dice, one last shot at fighting back. With her last bit of savings, she found a small, discreet law firm specializing in medical malpractice and whistleblower cases. Their ad was tiny, tucked away in the back of a legal directory, but the words "patient advocacy" resonated deeply. She dialed the number, her heart pounding with a renewed, desperate hope. The lawyer, Mr. Elias Vance, was nothing like the slick, impeccably dressed attorneys Sarah had imagined. He was a man in his late 50s, with a rumpled suit, tired eyes, and a desk piled high with case files. He listened patiently as Sarah, her voice raw with suppressed emotion, recounted the entire story. Mr. Henderson's decline, Dr. Thorne's dismissals, Miss Evans's gaslighting, her termination, the rideshare jobs, the police station, and finally, Susan Henderson's call. He read through her meticulously kept notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This is compelling, Nurse Jenkins," Vance said, finally leaning back in his creaky chair. "Very compelling. And damning for Dr. Thorne. The hospital's retaliatory actions against you, the non-disclosure threats, that's classic whistleblower suppression. They knew they had a problem, and they tried to bury it." A flicker of hope ignited in Sarah's chest. Someone finally believed her. "So, we have a case?" Vance nodded slowly. "We have the beginnings of one. But it won't be easy. The hospital has deep pockets, and Dr. Thorne is well connected. They'll fight dirty. Suing them for wrongful termination and medical malpractice could take years, cost a fortune, and may still not get to the root of the problem, which is Dr. Thorne's medical license. Our best bet, for both you and Mr. Henderson's memory, is to go through the State Medical Board." "The State Medical Board?" Sarah echoed. "What does that involve?" "It means filing a formal complaint against Dr. Thorne's license," Vance explained. "They have the power to investigate, hold hearings, and ultimately suspend or revoke a doctor's license. But they require more than just your word against his. We need to corroborate your story. We need additional evidence, ideally from within the hospital, or from other affected parties." The thought of facing more hospital bureaucracy, more dismissal, was daunting. But the idea of genuinely holding Dr. Thorne accountable, of preventing him from harming another patient, fueled her resolve. "What kind of evidence?" "Witness testimony, if we can get it," Vance said, rubbing his temples. "Other nurses, other residents who may have seen Dr. Thorne's patterns, any other unexplained complications or deaths under his care. It's a long shot, Sarah. Most people are too scared to cross the hospital or a powerful doctor. Thus began the arduous, frustrating work of building a case. Sarah felt like a detective, sifting through her memories, trying to recall every instance of Dr. Thorne's arrogance, every nurse who had quietly grumbled about him, every patient file that might hold a clue. Vance's office became her new sanctuary, a place where her story was not only believed but meticulously dissected and pursued. She cautiously reached out to former coworkers, not just Martha, but others she knew had been on Dr. Thorne's service. She sent careful, anonymized emails, explaining her situation without naming names, offering a discreet way to communicate. Most of them went unanswered. Several nurses simply blocked her number. One called her back, her voice a hushed whisper, warning Sarah to give up. "You're messing with forces bigger than you, Sarah. Just let it go before they destroy you completely." But then, a breakthrough. An email from a retired nurse, Mrs. Eleanor Davies, no relation to the HR rep, who had worked in surgical recovery for 30 years. She was a cynical, sharp-tongued woman who had seen it all and was now safely beyond the reach of the hospital's retaliation. She agreed to meet Sarah in a quiet coffee shop far from St. Jude's. "Thorne," Mrs. Davies snorted, stirring her tea, "always thought he was God's gift to surgery." And he was, for the easy cases. But when things went sideways, he was a coward. Or just blind. He never listened to the nurses. Never. Mrs. Davies, it turned out, had a photographic memory for patient incidents. She recalled 2 other specific, unexplained post-op deaths under Dr. Thorne's care in the past 5 years, one from a delayed diagnosis of a post-surgical infection, another from a critical fluid imbalance that was ignored for hours, despite nurses' repeated warnings. She couldn't provide formal documentation, but her detailed recollections, including dates and patient names, gave Vance concrete leads to pull those old charts. This was the crack in the wall they needed. Armed with Sarah's meticulous incident report, her termination letter, Mrs. Davies' detailed anonymous testimony, and the names of the 2 other patients, Vance drafted and filed the official complaint with the state medical board. The process was agonizingly slow. Weeks turned into months. The hospital's legal team responded immediately, filing a motion to dismiss the complaint as the retaliatory actions of a disgruntled former employee with a known history of insubordination. They painted Sarah as unstable, vengeful, and unreliable. It was a vicious, calculated attack designed to discredit her entirely. Sarah felt a fresh wave of despair, but Vance reassured her. "It's boilerplate, Sarah. They always do this. It's part of the process. The board will see through it." While waiting for the board's decision on their motion, Sarah continued her rideshare work. One afternoon, her mother, who had been experiencing some unexplained fatigue and joint pain, asked Sarah to drive her to a follow-up appointment with a rheumatologist, Dr. Elias. Sarah knew Dr. Elias by reputation, a prominent specialist, often seen at hospital galas with the St. Jude's elite. As they waited in the sterile, hushed waiting room, Sarah felt a growing unease. When Dr. Elias finally called her mother's name, his eyes flickered to Sarah. A brief, almost imperceptible pause, a faint narrowing of his eyes. "Nurse Jenkins," he said, his voice clipped, cool. "I recognize you. Didn't you work at St. Jude's?" "Yes, Dr. Elias. I did," Sarah replied, her stomach twisting. He nodded, a tight, dismissive gesture. "Right. Come in, Mrs. Jenkins." He barely acknowledged Sarah. The appointment itself was a masterclass in passive-aggressive antagonism. Dr. Elias listened to Sarah's mother's symptoms with an air of barely concealed impatience. When Sarah tried to add a detail, a specific observation about her mother's fatigue, Dr. Elias cut her off with a patronizing smile. "Nurse Jenkins, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I'm perfectly capable of eliciting a patient's history. Perhaps you're used to a different setting. We deal with complex diagnostics here, not just general observations." He made it sound like she was an ignorant interloper. He then proceeded to question her mother's description of her own pain, implying she was exaggerating. "Are you sure it's that severe, Mrs. Jenkins?" Sometimes, patients under stress can amplify their symptoms. "Is everything all right at home? Any recent disturbances?" He cast a pointed glance at Sarah, clearly implying she was the disturbance. Sarah felt her blood boil. "Dr. Elias, my mother is simply describing her symptoms accurately. She trusts my judgment." He smirked. "Indeed. Well, perhaps your judgment isn't always what it seems. I've heard things, rumors, about certain individuals who cause unnecessary trouble at reputable institutions. It can be quite disruptive to patient care, wouldn't you agree? The thinly veiled insult, the blatant disrespect, the way he openly aligned himself with the system that had destroyed her, it was rage bait in its purest form. Sarah could feel her hands clenching into fists under the examination table. Here, in this private doctor's office, the reach of St. Jude's and its powerful network extended. Doctor. Elias wasn't just a professional colleague, he was a gatekeeper, and she was clearly persona non grata. She bit her tongue, reminding herself that her mother was there. She would not give him the satisfaction of a public outburst. They left the office, Sarah's mother looking confused and a little upset. He was very rude, Sarah. Why was he like that? It's just politics, Mom, Sarah mumbled, trying to keep the fury out of her voice. But inside, a quiet, cold resolve hardened. This wasn't just about Dr. Thorne anymore. It was about exposing the entire, corrupt network that protected doctors like him and punished people like her. The fight had become deeply personal, an all-consuming fire. The call came on a Tuesday morning, a day like any other for Sarah, filled with the monotonous hum of her rideshare job and the lingering anxiety of her pending complaint. It was Mr. Vance. His voice, for once, held a hint of triumph. Sarah, good news. The state medical board has decided to move forward with the investigation. They're sending a team to St. Jude's today, unannounced. Sarah gasped, her heart leaping. Unannounced? So they won't have time to prepare? Exactly, Vance confirmed. They're thorough, and they're not easily swayed by big names or fancy hospital PR. This is it, Sarah. This is our shot. Meanwhile, at St. Jude's Hospital, Miss Evans was in her office, poring over budget reports, a look of perpetual stress etched on her face. Her phone buzzed. It was Miss Albright, the administrative assistant from the front desk, her voice barely a whisper of panic. Miss Evans, 2 people from the state medical board just walked in. Investigators. They asked for you, Dr. Thorne, and the patient charts for Mr. Henderson, a Mr. Robert Miller, and a Miss Clara Jenkins. Miss Evans felt a jolt of icy fear. Clara Jenkins. Sarah's mother. The old cases Mrs. Davies had recalled. This wasn't just about Sarah's complaint anymore. This was a full-blown investigation. Did they say why they're here? She demanded, her voice rising. No, ma'am. Just said it was a routine inquiry, but they seem very serious. They have files. Thick ones. Miss Evans slammed the phone down. Routine inquiry, her ass. This was Sarah, that insubordinate, troublesome nurse. She scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. She had to warn Thorne. She had to get ahead of this. But the words, unannounced, echoed in her mind. There was no getting ahead of this. They were already here. The 2 investigators, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Agent Miller and a quiet, observant man named Agent Hayes, were already in the main conference room when Miss Evans arrived, breathless. The room felt suddenly too small, too bright. Miss Evans straightened her suit jacket, forcing a tight, professional smile. Agents, to what do we owe the unexpected visit? Agent Miller, her eyes piercing, held up a file. We're here regarding a formal complaint filed against Dr. Marcus Thorne, and in connection, a review of several patient outcomes under his care. We'd like to begin by reviewing the full medical records of Mr. Arthur Henderson, Mr. Robert Miller, and Miss Clara Johnson, and then we'll speak with you. The air in the room thickened. Miss Evans had sent the old charts for Mr. Miller and Miss Johnson to medical records for archiving years ago, a euphemism for burying. She cursed internally. The interviews began. Miss Evans tried her usual corporate doublespeak, painting Sarah as a disgruntled employee, emphasizing Dr. Thorne's invaluable contributions to the hospital. But Agent Miller cut through her carefully constructed narrative with surgical precision. Miss Evans, Nurse Jenkins's notes clearly indicate a rapid decline in Mr. Henderson's condition, and multiple attempts to escalate concerns. Dr. Thorne's charted response, or lack thereof, seems inadequate. Can you explain why his instructions were to simply administer fluids when the patient's blood pressure was critically low and dropping? Miss Evans stammered, trying to justify. Well, sometimes, doctors make clinical judgments based on the whole picture. Nurse Jenkins was new. Perhaps her assessment was premature. Agent Hayes, who had been quietly reviewing the pulled charts, interjected. Miss Evans, in the chart for Mr. Robert Miller, dated 3 years ago, Nurses' notes indicate repeated concerns about increasing abdominal pain and distension post-operatively, which Dr. Thorne dismissed as expected surgical discomfort. Mr. Miller died 3 days later from a perforated bowel that was only discovered on autopsy. The similarities to Mr. Henderson's case are striking. Miss Evans's carefully maintained composure began to crack. She wiped a bead of sweat from her brow. These are isolated incidents. Complications happen. Complications that were flagged by nurses and dismissed by Dr. Thorne, Agent Miller stated, her voice flat, leaving no room for argument. We have reviewed the hospital's internal incident reporting system. We note a significant drop in incident reports filed from nurses on Dr. Thorne's service after Nurse Jenkins's termination. Coincidence, Miss Evans? The subtle threat, the implication of a culture of fear, hung heavy. Miss Evans's face was pale. Then came Dr. Thorne. He strode in, radiating his usual confident charm, a practiced smile on his lips. He offered his hand to Agent Miller, who shook it briefly, her expression unyielding. Agent's a pleasure. I trust Miss Evans has clarified these unfortunate matters. I assure you I run a very tight ship, and patient safety is my absolute priority. He settled into a chair, crossing his legs, projecting an image of calm authority. Agent Miller leaned forward. Dr. Thorne, we're here to discuss the care of Mr. Arthur Henderson. Nurse Jenkins' report indicates you were repeatedly informed of his deteriorating condition. Can you explain your decision to dismiss her concerns and delay further intervention? Thorne's smile didn't falter. As I explained to Nurse Jenkins at the time, and to Miss Evans, her interpretation of the vitals was, in my professional opinion, overly alarmist. Mr. Henderson was a man of advanced age with comorbidities. His initial decline was within the realm of expected post-operative fluctuations. I gave clear instructions for fluids and monitoring. Agent Hayes spoke, his voice quiet but sharp. Dr. Thorne, the blood pressure was 90/48, heart rate 115, and the patient was complaining of dizziness and pallor. Your own hospital's protocol for code sepsises or code hemorrhage indicates immediate physician assessment and intervention for those parameters. Are you suggesting your protocol is flawed, or your judgment superseded it? Thorne shifted uncomfortably. My judgment is based on decades of experience. There are nuances. Agent Miller cut him off. Nuances that led to a nicked artery going undiagnosed until Mr. Henderson coded on the way to the OR. And what about Mr. Robert Miller and Miss Clara Johnson? Both patients died after nurses repeatedly flagged critical deteriorating symptoms that you dismissed. Mr. Miller from a perforated bowel, Miss Johnson from severe sepsis. The pattern is, shall we say, concerning. Dr. Thorne's composure finally cracked. The charming mask slipped. His face flushed, and he started to sweat, tiny beads forming on his forehead. Those were unforeseen complications? Every surgeon has them. Unforeseen or ignored? Agent Miller pressed, her voice unwavering. Nurse Jenkins's report, corroborated by the consistent testimony of other nurses, indicates a pattern of dismissal, not just of concerns, but of the very possibility that you, Dr. Marcus Thorne, could be wrong. This isn't about complications, Doctor. It's about negligence. It's about a failure to listen. It's about a complete disregard for patient safety and for the expertise of your nursing staff. Dr. Thorne sputtered, unable to formulate a coherent defense. The carefully constructed edifice of his reputation was crumbling around him. He looked like a cornered animal, his arrogant charm replaced by naked fear. The investigators gathered their files, their expressions grim. Agent Miller stood. Dr. Thorne, based on the evidence collected today and the consistent pattern of alleged negligence and professional misconduct, the State Medical Board is issuing an immediate, temporary suspension of your medical license, pending a full formal hearing. The words hung in the air, a hammer blow. Dr. Thorne slumped back in his chair, his face ashen, utterly defeated. Miss Evans, standing beside him, looked as if she'd been struck. The hospital's star surgeon, suspended. The news would be catastrophic. Later that afternoon, under immense pressure from the hospital board desperate to contain the scandal, Miss Evans submitted her resignation, effective immediately. The system, once so impenetrable, had finally begun to crack. The whisper of the nurses, once ignored, was finally being heard. Months passed, marked by official hearings and legal filings, but the outcome was inevitable. Dr. Marcus Thorne once the untouchable star surgeon of St. Jude's, had his medical license permanently revoked by the state medical board. The detailed testimony of Sarah, corroborated by the anonymous Mrs. Davies, the chilling re-examination of old patient charts, and the irrefutable pattern of negligence, left him no room to maneuver. The headlines were sensational, exposing the code of silence that had allowed him to endanger patients for so long. The hospital, desperate to avoid further scandal and a class action lawsuit, offered Sarah a substantial wrongful termination settlement. It was more money than she had ever seen, enough to pay off her student loans entirely, to cover all her back rent, and to provide a comfortable buffer. The financial anxiety that had suffocated her for months finally lifted. But more significant than the money was the vindication. The job offers started pouring in, not from the local hospitals that had once blacklisted her, but from institutions across the state, even across the country. They admired her courage, her integrity, her unwavering commitment to patient advocacy. She was no longer a troublemaker. She was a hero. Sarah accepted a position at a progressive teaching hospital in a new city, miles away from the shadow of St. Jude's. It was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild her career on her own terms. On her first day, in the bustling post-op recovery unit, she found herself guiding a new, fresh-faced graduate nurse, a young woman named Chloe, through the intricacies of patient monitoring. Chloe, barely out of school, nervously approached Sarah, clutching a patient chart. "Sarah, mister?" "Davies in bed 3. His blood pressure is a little low, and he's complaining of some abdominal discomfort." "Doctor, Chen just did his appendectomy, and he usually says not to bother him unless it's really urgent." Chloe looked hesitant, her eyes darting between the chart and the patient. Sarah smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She remembered that feeling, the fear of challenging authority, the pressure to conform. She walked over to Mr. Davies's bed, gently palpated his abdomen, and checked his vitals herself. The numbers weren't critical, not yet, but the seed of concern was there, just as it had been with Mr. Henderson. She looked at Chloe, her voice gentle but firm. "Chloe, your first and only loyalty is to the person in that bed. Not to Dr. Chen, not to the hospital, not to anyone else. If your gut tells you something is wrong, and the numbers support it, you speak up, every single time. Never be afraid to advocate for them. That's what being a nurse really means." Chloe nodded, her expression shifting from apprehension to understanding, a spark of resolve igniting in her own eyes. Sarah watched her walk back to the nursing station, pick up the phone, and with a newfound confidence, dial Dr. Chen. The cycle of silence had been broken. Sarah had not just saved her career. She had, in her own quiet way, begun to change the world.